Hi.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for this application information session. This afternoon, we're going to be focused on affordable housing projects. And my name is Molly Crone. I'm a senior planner with the county's Community Development Agency, and I'm joined by my colleague, Aline Tennelian.
Hi, everybody. Aline Tennelian, planner with Housing and Federal Grants. We've got a couple of other colleagues in the room. Jillian Zeiger, senior planner with our team, and then Liz Darby, our equity coordinator. So before we get started today, we're just going to provide some brief reminders around our virtual meeting today. So the meeting is being recorded. We will be sharing the recording and the slides afterwards. We'll also be posting it on our website shortly soon. We recommend or ask you to please stay on mute when you're not speaking. You'll have an opportunity to speak towards the end with Q&A. If you're having technical issues joining audio or viewing, please try exiting the meeting and then rejoining. If you need technical assistance, please use the Zoom chat function at the bottom of your screen to communicate with us. Same if you have questions or comments, use the Zoom chat feature, or you can use the raise hand function to verbally ask your question. We're going to attempt to answer all the questions verbally or in the chat towards the end during Q&A. If you're joining us by phone today, you can utilize some functions to raise your hand or mute your phone. To raise your virtual hand, you can use *9, and to mute, it's *6. So with that, we'll get started and jump into our agenda. So we just did a brief introduction. We're now going to jump into the application timeline and the cycle. Just for a reminder, this is for our notice of funding availability for housing funds. We'll then go into the different funding types and priorities, as well as eligible projects and any new requirements. We'll then end with a review of the applications and then follow up with Q&A. So just to situate ourselves in the timeline, the application period opened on Monday, January 22nd. Today, we're hosting this information session for potential applicants. This particular session is about the housing funds. In addition to the meeting today, we're going to be holding several weekly office hours on Thursday, February 1st, 8th, and 15th from 1 to 2 p.m. You can find that Zoom information on the federal grants website. The application closes on Friday, February 16th at 5 p.m. Following the application closure, we're going to be reviewing applications and providing recommendations. That's going to start with the Priority Setting Committee on April 4th, followed by a Novato City Council hearing for projects in the Novato planning area on April 23rd. Then on May 6th, San Rafael City Council meeting for projects located in the San Rafael planning area, followed by on May 16th, a Priority Setting Committee meeting to discuss the funding allocations overall. And then lastly, on June 4th, final approval and recommendations to the Board of Supervisors. And then lastly, before we jump in, we wanted to highlight the subscription link located on our federal grants page. We recommend, if you haven't already, to subscribe to continue to get updates for this application period and other funding opportunities down the line. So if you go to marincounty.org/federal grants, there's a subscription link at the top of the page where you can enter your email address. Okay, so jumping into the available funding and what we're talking about today, this NOFA is for approximately $2.7 million in total, and that includes $1.2 million in state permanent local housing allocation, and that 1.2 includes a 1-for-1 match from the county's Affordable Housing Fund. There's also several pots of funding from HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. First is the HOME program, the Home Investment Partnerships program, with about $850,000 and $650,000 in Community Development Block Grants, or CDBG. For a little bit of background on PLHA and the Housing Trust Funds, the county first applied and received authorization to receive these PLHA funds from the state back in 2020. This funding cycle represents the fourth allocation in PLHA, and the county has received all eligible allocations to date. So to back up a little bit, Marin County is eligible to receive these funds because of its designation as an entitlement community and because it continues to comply with state housing laws around providing annual progress reports to the state for the housing element. So that explains the eligibility. Those funds, when we applied for those funds back in 2020, we thought it was best to leverage those funds by matching it with our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which was established back in 1981 with the goal of increasing permanent affordable housing stock in the county for low and very low income households. Next slide. So eligible jurisdictions, projects must be located in a jurisdiction with a certified housing element. This is a requirement from HCD. And at the time of this NOFA, the following jurisdictions have received housing element certification. That includes the unincorporated county, town of Corte Madera, city of Mill Valley, city of San Rafael, city of Sausalito, and town of Tiburon. To note here, the certification process is ongoing, so a number of jurisdictions may receive certification down the line. We continue to monitor that. HCD has a reporting tool online. We'll post that link in the chat momentarily, where you can stay up to date with any of the certification processes. And also of note, the CDBG and home programs are not restricted by housing element status. Next slide.
Okay.
Now I'll turn it over to Molly to go over CDBG.
Great. Thank you so much, Aline. So CDBG, Community Development Block Grant Funds, as Aline mentioned, these are provided through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. There are a number of goals for these funds. So to ensure decent, affordable housing, provide services to our most vulnerable communities, and particularly to benefit low to moderate income persons. HUD's definition of low income is a little bit lower than what we traditionally see in affordable housing. So low income for CDBG is at 60% of the area median income, and moderate income is at 80%. There are 3 national objectives that projects must meet, at least one of these. Traditionally, we have focused projects on meeting the benefiting low to moderate income persons national objective, but there's also preventing or eliminating blight and meeting other community development needs that there are no other resources for. As I mentioned, these funds are allocated by HUD, and the county receives them and administers them on behalf of the entire county, all of the jurisdictions in the county. We are what's called an entitlement jurisdiction, which you heard Aline mention. And what that means is we have a population of over 250,000 residents. And so we are eligible to receive funds in a formula, using a formula. That formula is calculated annually, and we receive a distribution from HUD based on our low income population, our rates of overcrowded housing, and my goodness, why am I? There's one more aspect, and for some reason I cannot remember it at this moment. But these funds are distributed by planning areas. We have 3 planning areas in the county: County Other, Novato, and San Rafael. County Other is all of the jurisdictions outside of Novato and San Rafael. The reason that we have Novato and San Rafael have their own planning areas is because they have a population of over 50,000 residents. Because of this, they're eligible to be their own entitlement community, but they have chosen to continue to participate in this collaborative effort as a means to reduce the administrative burden on our applicants. So instead of having to apply for funds to Novato and San Rafael, there's one application for the entire county. Funds are distributed based on a formula that mirrors the federal formula. So in Novato, we anticipate that there's going to be about $130,000 in CDBG funding for housing. San Rafael, we anticipate $200,000, and for the rest of the county, about $270,000. The Home Investment Partnership Program is also a program allocated by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. This is a program that's distributed countywide. It doesn't have planning areas. It comes directly to the County of Marin, and we work with our priority setting committee to allocate funds. 15% of these funds are required to go to a project developer that is called a Community Housing Development Organization, or a CHODO. And there are specific requirements that a nonprofit developer needs to meet in order to be certified as a CHODO. The sole goal of home funds is to create and maintain and improve affordable housing. We have a couple of updates around our applicability of funding projects in certain communities. So last year, after about 12 years of being in a voluntary compliance agreement with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, we were cleared, and we are no longer required to report under what we call the VCA. And what does this mean? So the VCA previously prevented us from funding housing projects in the Canal and Marin City. And so now we are able to fund rehab projects for housing in the Canal and Marin City areas. We do not, we're not able to fund new construction in these areas because these funds are intended to increase access to affordable housing in communities that are not impacted, that have access to resources and opportunities. So a little bit more about the priorities for local funding. I mentioned the countywide priority setting committee earlier. This is a committee made up of elected officials from local jurisdictions, as well as community members representing the protected classes. And this group has identified a number of funding priorities for the 2024 grant cycle. So the project type priorities include family housing and a land trust model in Eastern Marin that provides home ownership opportunities specifically around our historically Black communities. We can fund other types of projects, but these types of projects would be prioritized first in the evaluation. We also have a number of additional priority considerations that were identified by the PSC. So projects that affirmatively further fair housing and have a commitment to affirmative marketing are prioritized. Projects that serve members of the protected classes as defined by HUD. This includes race, color, religion, national origin, sex, disability, and familial status. And then projects that serve low-income persons are also a priority. I want to go into what affirmatively furthering fair housing and affirmative marketing are, just to add some clarity here. So affirmatively furthering fair housing means to take proactive measures beyond simply combating discrimination, but to foster an inclusive community and create additional access to community assets for all people, and specifically those protected by the Fair Housing Act. What this would result in is addressing disparities in our community and access to resources, access to housing, and overall opportunities. These actions should overcome patterns of segregated living. They should promote more integrated communities and end racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. And finally, really foster and maintain compliance with our civil rights and fair housing laws. All of our projects that are funded through CDBG and Home And then actually all of our housing projects that are funded by the county are required to affirmatively market there. And so affirmative marketing is a tool that we use to achieve affirmatively furthering fair housing. And this is really targeting information about your programs and opportunities to groups of people that would be least likely to know about these opportunities and least likely to access them. Some of these components that go into affirmative marketing, they include really data analysis and identification of populations that are least likely to be served. Here in Marin County, because we are an affluent white community, we really look at affirmative marketing around targeting demographics that are racially and ethnic minorities, people with disabilities, families with children under 18. It's really going and reaching out to those communities. We also require that an organization develop policy to implement these affirmative marketing plans, that they train their staff around how to engage in affirmative marketing. We provide an annual training with Fair Housing Advocates of Northern California to help with this, and then doing the actual marketing and outreach work itself. Affirmative marketing also requires that you look at your past actions and you modify your activities in order to better achieve your goals. There's a requirement for record keeping and ongoing compliance. So once you've made your plan, you enact your plan, and then you evaluate the outcomes and you make modifications based on those outcomes. Some examples of affirmative marketing include having your website information posted in Spanish or other languages, brochures and flyers printed and distributed in Spanish, Vietnamese, other languages, hiring staff that are fluent in other languages, and posting paid advertisements to programs about your programs and housing opportunities in, La Voz, which is a Spanish English paper that serves multiple counties in the Bay Area. Aline?
Thanks, Molly. So now I'll just jump into very briefly at a high level some funding priorities for the PLHA and Housing Trust match piece of this NOFA. So priorities for this bucket includes projects that are ready to move forward, whether that be demonstration of land use entitlements, environmental review, commitment of other required funding and resources, development projects with site control. This is something that HCD particularly wants to see for the PLHA portion of funds. And the projects supporting those earning 60% or below the area median income.
Some of the eligible activities within this NOFA include rental housing, homeowner housing, and special needs housing. Funding sources are able to support different types of projects. So all of the funding sources that are available in this application can support acquisition for rental housing, as well as homeowner housing and special needs housing. For rehabilitation, this is available for really all of these as well. We need to update this table a little bit. The real caveat here is around new construction. So CDBG cannot be used for new construction. The only time that it is eligible for new construction is if the land that the housing is being built on is publicly owned, and it can only contribute to the underlying infrastructure. So water, sewer, sidewalks, those types of things. But generally, these funding sources can support a variety of project types. Some of the ineligible project types for all of this, housing, rehabilitation, and construction, if it's supporting projects that aren't serving low to moderate income, that's ineligible. And then for CDBG and home, only the purchase of we can't purchase tools with this funding, only materials for a project. So durable equipment would not be an allowable expense. For new construction, we do not allow new construction in Marin City or the canal with these funds. And then projects that are located in a FEMA designated regulatory floodway are precluded from being funded. However, projects that are just in a special flood hazard zone would be required to have flood insurance.
All right, thanks, Molly. So now we'll jump into the actual application. So the application link is available. It's available on this slide and also linked on our federal grants webpage and affordable housing webpage. I've included the federal grants webpage link in the chat. Some helpful tools that we want to point out to help you with the application. So since the application is an online form, you won't be able to save your responses, and there's a number of narrative-based responses. So we've developed a Word document prep tool that's also linked on the website that you can use to draft your responses and think through before you actually submit online. We also have a sample budget and pro forma linked on the website. And the NOFA, so the Notice of Funding Availability, contains all the information from this presentation as well as additional details. So all of that is linked on the website. And a reminder that the applications are due Friday, February 16th at 5 p.m. We ask that you submit one application per category. And lastly, please feel free to email us with any questions or requests to federalgrants@marincounty.org. And just to jump into a little bit around what the review process looks like. So first, we do need a complete application to review, and that involves, submitting before the deadline, the February 16th deadline, and including all required attachments to the presentation. Again, you can refer to the NOFA for a full set of details about that. And then of note, as we noted previously with some of the priorities, this is some of the criteria we look at when we evaluate projects. And this list is not exhaustive, but some of the high-level points include making sure the project aligns with the funding priorities that we talked about. The demonstration of site control that we mentioned is very critical for HCD, for example, for those PLHA funds. We look at the organization's experience with developing and maintaining high-quality affordable housing projects. We also look at the organization's financial capacity to complete the project and ability to maximize impact through number of affordable housing or other creative approaches. We also take a look at the ability for the project to raise other funding sources, including LIHTC, the low-income housing tax credits, and then also a comparison of per unit request amounts with other county-assisted housing developments. Some additional requirements for you to keep in mind as you work on your applications of note are the environmental review, the NEPA. This has to be up to date for all projects that are funded through HUD. So that includes CDBG and home. The review lasts 5 years if the project does not change. And particularly, we want to highlight that the NEPA must be completed before any funds can be spent, and spending the funds prior to environmental review can't be reimbursed. If the NEPA requires mitigation, the grantee is responsible for implementing that. Prevailing wage is another requirement. So there's a requirement that prevailing wage or fair wages be paid to all contractors. This is required for the PLHA funds, which is governed by state law, state prevailing wage law, as well as CDBG and home, which is governed by the Davis-Bacon Act. And prevailing wage documentation will be required for all projects. And then lastly here, procurement, CDBG and home, so the federal dollars are required to abide by county procurement requirements. And then there's a new requirement here that the CDBG and home requirement or projects costing over $200,000 are subject to BABA, which is the Build America, Buy America policy that has been newly implemented at the federal level. And then One last note here that the federal funds, CDBG and home projects that were built before 1978 will require lead testing or proof of past testing or treatment in accordance with the lead safe housing rule.
One little addition here under BABA, what the requirement is that if the project is over $200,000, then all steel and iron metal products need to be procured within the United States. So this has implications for your bidding process as well as potential cost increase.
Thanks for that context. Okay. And we also want to plug in our office hours. So in addition to this session, we're holding weekly office hours. If you have any questions, virtually via Zoom. So it'll be next Thursday and then the following Thursdays, the 18th and 15th from 1 to 2 p.m. The Zoom information is on this slide and also on our website. And then, of course, you can direct any questions to us via email or phone. We're happy to talk through any specific questions you have. Okay, with that, I think we'll open it up for Q&A.
So if folks have questions, you can raise your hand and we can unmute you to speak, or you can put your questions in the Q&A and we can answer them live. And we can talk project specific, or we can be general too.
Got Jack's hand raised. Jack, if you'd like to pose your question, should be able to unmute now.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
And thank you for the enlightened presentation. There are some elements in housing projects that you have not covered. Specifically, I'm referring to workforce housing and also senior housing. And to what degree and how could this segment fall under the state legislation which has been passed, which encourages and supports projects that will have 20% of its occupancy be for affordable or workforce or medium or even above the average earnings in the area, in the county itself. And I can be specific as to a site that I have in mind if you want me to, but otherwise, if you can cover those areas, and that would be very helpful in planning, deciding, choosing that path, and or not knowing that that is not doable.
Sure. Thank you for your question, Jack. So the priorities that have been identified for these funding sources include family housing and land trust model in Eastern Marin. That does not preclude other types of projects from being applied for or funded. It just means that we'll be prioritizing those types of projects when evaluating them. These projects or these funds are really prioritized for affordable housing specifically. We have requirements through the state and through HUD to fund housing that is serving low-income residents. And so that's really around 60% of the area median income. So these are not necessarily funds that you would apply for if you're doing a market rate project with inclusionary units. That's that's not really the model that these funds are designed for. And generally, you need to be a nonprofit developer in order to apply for these funds. So a market rate developer would need to partner with a nonprofit.
So is the answer yes in partnering with a nonprofit?
Sure, absolutely. If a market rate developer wanted to partner with a nonprofit to do 100% affordable project, they could be eligible for these funds.
So the blending and working and combining with the state legislation that I brought up earlier, would that can that be part of the structure and part of the project or not?
If the project is 100% affordable, then it would be eligible for funding. If it's a market rate development with a percentage of the units being affordable, it would certainly, only those affordable units would be eligible, and it would be probably a little less competitive.
I'm going to challenge you now with a smile, which is, what if it were two buildings, on the same site? One, the affordable section, the other, the not affordable section.
So you would probably just be applying for one of those buildings as a project.
So the answer is yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sure. Looks like we have a question from Charlotte to give some examples on how funds, home funds can or cannot be used for rental assistance programs. So the county has not prioritized rental assistance programs for our home funds because we receive such a small amount of home. These funds have been prioritized for new construction, rehabilitation, resyndication of existing affordable units.
We've got another question here. If you've received funds from these sources in past rounds, can you apply again? Is there a limit on the funds allocated to a specific project?
So yes, you are eligible to apply for additional funds. There are some parameters around that. Projects need to show a clear path to moving the project forward. If those past funds have not already been expended, there needs to be a documented path forward for that. I believe the only funding type that has a limit on the amount of funds that can be allocated to a specific project is home. And what is triggered here is you could actually apply for as much as you want, but at a certain threshold, we can only fund per unit at a certain threshold. So once you go over that threshold, you trigger a lot of additional cost incurring requirements. So, we would be happy to talk to you about what those thresholds are based on your project type. But it's looking at the per unit cost. But yes, projects can apply for funds for projects that they've applied for in the past.
Great, thanks, Molly. Tonique had a question. I was just about to answer it in the chat, but we can just address it verbally. Are the additional requirements on the website? And if so, would this be under the submission requirements on the PDF or in another location? So the NOFA document has a submission requirements section towards the end. That's where you can find the listing of all the requirements. And I'll put that link in the chat. Question here from Kim. If a project is in a special flood hazard area, can it still apply for PLHA HTF funds? And the response is yes. PLHA and HTF funds don't have that same limitation like the HUD dollars. So yes.
And with the HUD dollars in a special flood hazard zone, you can apply for funds. You just would have to have flood insurance. The the only types of projects that are precluded from funding are those that are in a floodway, which is distinct and different from a special flood hazard zone. Usually floodways are right along creeks. And there is a link to a HUD, a FEMA map in the NOFA that can help you identify whether or not this impacts your project.
All right. Any other questions? Feel free to put them in the chat, in the Q&A, or raise your hand. Jack, I see your hand. Did you have another question? Let's see if you... I don't think I'm able to unmute. Molly, are you able to unmute?
He's allowed to unmute. If he has another question, he can.
Okay. Well, Jack, if you have another question, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask. Mike posed this question, I think earlier, and I think you might have responded, but I'll pose it again here so we can have it for everyone. I'm a developer and I'm interested in building affordable housing in Marin. Where could I find a nonprofit to partner with?
Yeah, and we have a list of affordable housing nonprofit developers that we can circulate to anybody who's interested in that. We have we have everybody's registration information. So anybody who's interested in that list, please just throw your name in the chat and we can circulate that.
Or feel free to send us an email. I've put that in the chat too. Jennifer shared that PEP Housing is a nonprofit. They'd be interested, and put contact information in the chat.
Excellent.
Any other questions? Not seeing anything come up.
All right, well, we can stay on for a few if folks have any questions percolate. Otherwise, we look forward to receiving your applications. Please don't hesitate to be in touch with any questions that you have. And please do join those office hours as you're looking at the application. If any questions come up for you, we're happy to sort of noodle through questions and strategize, problem solve, think through things. The requirements and regulations for the state and for HUD are complicated, and we work with them regularly. Not everybody does, so.
Yeah, we're happy to help translate the state and federal language. All right. Well, yeah, we'll be here for a few more minutes. Feel free. If any questions come up, put them in the chat, raise your hand. We'll be glad to answer.
All right, I'm looking at the developer spreadsheet right now, and we do have PEP housing listed, so.
Great.
Excellent.
And I was just about to put this in the chat, but Cindy, you read my mind. So We're going to post the recording and the slides on our website. And if you've registered for this, we will email you those as well. And our goal is to do that by the end of this week.
All right. It doesn't look like we have any more questions coming in, so I think we will close out this session. Thank you all again for your time today and for your interest. We are eager to receive your applications and to learn about the amazing projects that you're working on. Please reach out and let us know what questions you may have. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks, everybody.